My sister, 23, female, got engaged a few months ago to her college boyfriend, 23, male. I personally never liked or approved of him because I just don't think he's good enough for her. He's really lazy and never seems to care about his life or grades. Whenever I, 25, female, used to visit my sister in college, he was always glued to his gaming console. Either that or he was out with friends. I don't even know what my sister ever saw in him, and even tried to warn her that he's up to no good, but she didn't want to hear anything bad about him. She was totally smitten and wanted to be with him. I never did and never will understand what she saw in him, but when they got engaged, I thought he'd finally get his act together, but no such thing happened. Even after they graduated, he'd struggle to hold down a job and would switch every few months. My sister was the one bringing home the money, while all he did was laze around and go drinking and partying with his friends, which irked me, but I didn't say anything so that I wouldn't hurt my sister. 1 week ago, my sister visited me and she seemed really distressed. I mean, she usually is, but it's mostly because her fiancé quit her job again and they always end up postponing their wedding day because of the expenses. However, this time she seemed even more fidgety than usual, and I just had to ask her. She broke down in tears and told me that her fiancé was forcing her to reject a promotion that she'd been offered at work. She's been working at her present company for 1.5 years, and she's diligent and hard-working, so she was due for a big raise anyway, and she finally got it after several late nights and working weekends. But her fiancé had just started a new job, and he wanted her to say no to the promotion because it would mean that she'd earn more than him. Her fiancé had usually been able to match the starting salary whenever he joined a new job, but if my sister accepted the promotion, then he wouldn't be able to match her salary unless he himself also worked hard enough to get a promotion, or maybe not even then. She told me that she's been fighting with him about this for days now, and her company needs an answer within this week, so she's just torn about what she should be doing, which is why she's so stressed out. I was furious that she was even considering turning down such a huge opportunity because of her fiancé and his misogynistic attitude. I consoled my sister and told her that while I understood why she didn't want to hurt her fiancé, she must also learn to look out for herself first. And I also explained to her that in a more practical sense, she'd be doing both of them a favor since he keeps either quitting or getting fired, so at least one of them should have a stable career and source of income. Of course, I explained this to her in much nicer words so that it wouldn't come across as harsh. But I just couldn't believe that my sister was letting this thick-headed moron walk all over her like this, and was bending over backward to inflate his ego. It just sucked that she'd even fallen for this guy in the first place, but I couldn't convince her to dump him anyway, so I decided to make the best of the situation and just advised her to accept the promotion right away and think about the consequences later. I made her email her company and inform them that she'd accept the promotion, and made sure that she didn't unsend it or anything by taking her out for dinner to help take her mind off of things. She seemed a little happier by the time she left and thanked me for helping her out. I felt awful after she left and wanted to file for divorce on her behalf because there was just no way that this horrible rat had done anything at all to deserve someone as brilliant as my sister, and it killed me to watch her make herself smaller so that she wouldn't hurt her fiancé. I know this sounds like I'm being controlling or being too protective, but honestly, my sister has always been too shy and timid for her own good, and she needs this. Anyway, I think 2 days ago she finally told her fiancé that she'd accepted the promotion, and they got into a massive argument. Obviously, he wanted her to somehow undo it and go back to her earlier position, but she decided to stand her ground this time, and that resulted in him moving out. He gave her an ultimatum and told her that she could either go back to her earlier salary or they were done with her. And now my sister's a total mess because obviously she doesn't want to leave him, but she can't exactly reject the promotion now that she's already started work. I've been living with her and taking care of her for the past 2 days because she's a total mess right now and can't be left alone at all. My parents, however, who have been nothing but silent spectators when it came to my sister's toxic relationship, have now suddenly started getting involved and are blaming me for how things have turned out. They think that I shouldn't have given my sister any advice at all and should have just let her come to her own decision instead of interfering. They told me that I was way too pushy, and in a way I tried to control my sister's life the same way that I accused her fiancé. I don't know if that's true, but I did interfere and make her accept that promotion. I really think that's very different from what her fiancé was trying to do, because he was trying to harm her future for the sake of his own ego, whereas I just wanted to do the best for her. I won't mind if my sister and her fiancé end up breaking off their engagement, truth be told, but I don't want to be categorized as the same kind of toxic and manipulative person that her fiancé is. What my parents said threw me off. So, aita for forcing my sister to accept the promotion in spite of knowing that it'll have a negative impact on her relationship with her fiancé? Update 1. My sister's fiancé agreed to meet her today. It's been 3 days since he left and I moved in with her, and she's been constantly trying to get through to him. My parents still think that I owe her and her fiancé an apology for meddling in their relationship, and well, I'm ready to apologize to my sister, but there's no way I'm apologizing to her fiancé. I feel terrible that my sister has to go through any of this at all, and I'm sure that if she was with a less toxic guy, he'd be celebrating her promotion instead of demanding that she turn it down just to flatter him. But yeah, that's just my opinion, and clearly my parents don't agree with it. I don't know why exactly they want her to stay with this loser, especially when they know what kind of person he is, but it's not surprising given that they've never been particularly involved in our lives after we became adults. I guess they just want to keep the drama to a minimum, no matter what cost it comes at, which is kind of a sad way for a parent to think. Anyway, my sister had calmed down for today and is really nervous. I've told her that whatever her fiancé says, she must not do anything rash. I'm hinting at the fact that I don't think it's a good idea for her to step down from her position just because of her fiancé, because like I had explained earlier, they need that financial stability because of how erratic her fiancé's job situation is. She said she understood, but now I don't know what's going to happen when she finally does meet him. She might just fall for whatever he's saying and end up stepping down anyway, which would be a really bad move. But I just have my fingers crossed that she thinks things through and doesn't let her emotions control her. My parents are honestly fine with anything as long as he doesn't break the engagement off. I have a feeling they're going to come down really hard on me if anything of the sort happens because of some things that have happened in the past, but I'm optimistic. Update 2. Just to be clear, when I was referring to some things from the past, I was referring to my own breakup with my long-term boyfriend a year ago. I didn't know if it was relevant enough to be brought up here, but I guess I should talk about it. I've been with my boyfriend ever since middle school, and we always knew that we wanted to get married. We weren't officially engaged or anything, but we knew that we were going to get married. But then, 1 year ago, he was offered a job in Australia, and it was a huge move for his career, so he decided to take it without even consulting me first. I couldn't move to Australia because I just started my own business and already had investors here. He wanted me to sell my business to someone else, but I didn't want to do that either, and neither did I want to uproot my entire life and move with him. I insisted we try out long distance for a while so that we can at least try to make things work, but he was against it and told me that I could either move with him or we could call it quits. And with a heavy heart, we ended our 12-year relationship. We haven't spoken since then, but I still haven't moved on. I do think I made the right decision about staying and working on my business, though. because it's doing well now and I'm earning a lot more than I was as an employee. My parents were very unhappy with me back then as well because they thought I ruined my chances at getting married and building a life by rejecting the opportunity to move in with my boyfriend. And this time around as well, they believed I'm forcing my sister to make the same mistake that I did. Truth be told, I don't think I made a mistake, and neither did she. My parents think that as daughters, we shouldn't have the liberty of going around being so picky about men because after we hit our 30s, no man is going to want to marry us anymore, which is why the only time they bother to get involved in our lives is when it comes to boyfriends or marriage, since that's all they care about. Anyway, that's their opinion, and I don't really think it makes sense, so I don't let it bother me too much either. And I still stand by the fact that whatever I did in the past regarding my own relationship, or even my sister's relationship, was for the best. Maybe she won't realize it right now, what with all the emotional distress because of her fiancé's behavior, but she'll definitely thank me for this years later. She's been out to meet her fiancé for almost 3 hours now, and I'm really tense about what she's going to do because I'd hate for her to get pushed into doing something she doesn't want to. Update 3. Yesterday, my sister met her fiancé. She came back home really late and looked emotionally exhausted, so I didn't ask her anything. This morning, after we'd had breakfast, I finally asked her what they talked about. She told me that he was still insisting on her giving the promotion up and even said that he'd hold down this job and she didn't need to worry about money anymore. But my sister, thankfully, had stood her ground and refused to do so. They ended up getting into an argument at the restaurant they'd met at, and while initially they tried to keep it down, he lost his temper and started yelling at her in front of everyone. He told her that the only reason he'd even agreed to meet her this one time was because our parents had requested him to sort things out with her. Otherwise, he had no interest in being with a woman who couldn't bring herself to respect him. She was shocked that our parents had done such a thing because, like I said, they usually never get involved. But then again, this was about a boy, so for whatever reason, they thought it was appropriate to interfere in spite of the fact that they'd been blaming me for meddling in the first place. I thought that was a tad bit hypocritical, but whatever. She then told me that the restaurant manager had to intervene and had to ask him to leave because he was making the environment really hostile for everyone else present, but he refused to do that and eventually had to be dragged out by security because of the ruckus that he was causing. My sister paid the bill for the food that he'd ordered and left after him, really embarrassed and ashamed of whatever had happened. She was ready to give up and head home, but just then her fiancé seemed to have a change of heart and started begging her on his knees to talk to him and give him one last chance to explain his side of things. She agreed reluctantly, and they decided to sit in a nearby park so that they could talk because she didn't want another embarrassing scene like in the restaurant. He tried to be calm this time, but even then he seemed really annoyed and told her that the only reason he hadn't wanted her to take that promotion was because he was afraid she'd start feeling that she was superior to him and he wanted to keep her humble and grounded. My sister tried to explain to him that she would never think of herself as inherently superior to anyone else, even if she is, like in this case, and said that he didn't need to worry about abstract things like these. But he was still trying to convince her to give it all up, just so that he could be with her, and even said that our parents had been right to try and bring them back together since it's pretty obvious that they're soulmates, and she shouldn't let her job get in the way of her personal life. They bickered about the same thing for a while, but she realized that they were talking in circles, and there was just no point in trying to convince him. So she told him that her decision was final and that no matter what he said, she wasn't going to give the promotion up. He ended up getting pissed off again, but this time he didn't yell at her and instead tried to emotionally manipulate her by bringing up all the things he'd apparently given up for her in the past. He told her that he'd given up smoking for her in college. He'd given up being friends with his ex-girlfriends, and he'd even given up the opportunity to go to film school. In spite of the gravity of the situation, I couldn't help but laugh at his bizarre list, since the first two weren't favors that he'd done for her, and the last one was just because he'd asked my sister to pay for the film school just after they graduated, and she'd said no because she wasn't financially stable enough to commit to that. And moreover, even she knew that this was just a whim and he'd get bored within a month. So obviously, his guilt trip didn't work either, and finally he had no choice but to give up trying. He gave his ring back to her because even that had been bought with my sister's money. After she broke things off with him for good, she decided to walk by herself for a bit, and that was the reason she came home so late. She was upset about her relationship ending, but she said that she also felt really relieved that it was finally over, since the last couple of days had made her realize that he never was good for her. And if she'd stuck with him, then she'd never be able to live life to the fullest. I'm glad that she's finally realized that, and even though she's still upset about the way things have turned out, I'm happy that her fiancé is now her ex-fiancé, because he never ever deserved her, and he just proved that he wasn't going to change in the future either. My sister was lucky to have quit while she was still ahead, or else she'd have to be bogged down by her deadbeat fiancé for the rest of her life. And that would be a waste of her brilliance. She thanked me for being so supportive, but honestly, I just wanted to be there for my little sister and make sure she always shines bright. I've decided to stay with her for a few more days just to ensure she's okay, since she's obviously going through a serious heartbreak. I'm hoping she powers through this, and someday she'll be glad that she did. Update 4. It's been 2 days since my sister broke up with her fiancé, and today she told my parents. Now, I don't know what exactly I'd expected, but I certainly hadn't expected them to react the way they did. They completely flipped out on both of us and told us that they were done dealing with stubborn and arrogant women like us, that no man would ever put up with our behavior since we were so full of ourselves, and even added that this was all my fault. I was really shocked that they were saying such horrible things to us, in spite of knowing every single detail. I mean, I know that they'd like for us to get married and think that's our only goal now, that we're in our 20s, but this was a bit extreme. I got mad as well, and I told them that they couldn't speak to us like that, and said that things they were saying were incredibly hurtful and sexist, but they weren't having any of it. They went off on a rant about how I'd first ruined my own life by ditching my boyfriend for my job, and now I was hell-bent on ruining my sister's life as well by convincing her that her job, for whatever reason, was more important than finding a husband. They said that they were ashamed of us and couldn't believe they'd raised such incompetent daughters. I was fuming, but before I could continue arguing, my sister decided to hang up and end it there. She was equally upset, but still tried to reassure me, saying that this wasn't my fault, and she knew that whatever I'd done had been for her own good. I felt like crap after listening to my own parents shame me for wanting to have a flourishing career instead of just jumping at the first chance of getting married. They'd always tried to drill it into our heads that getting married and starting a family should be a priority and not a choice, but I'd never even imagined that not following their goals would end with such humiliation. I'm furious at my parents, obviously, and I'm even more angry with myself for letting them believe that they had any say at all in what me or my sister choose to do or how we choose to live. We're full-grown adult women, for God's sake. They have no right to treat us like this and say such horrible things to us for wanting to choose ourselves over men. Sorry. Not sorry for finding a husband is definitely not my top priority, and neither has it ever been. And I'm really glad that my sister decided to break things off with her fiancé as well. She deserves better than this, and so do I. I'm still at her place, and even though I was planning to go back home this evening, I think I'll stick around until her fiancé comes back one last time to gather his stuff, which should be in a few days now. Update 5. My sister and I decided to go no contact with our parents after the fight and told them that they could either take back what they said and respect our decision, but they doubled down on it and told us that we were free to do whatever we wanted and they were glad to be rid of us. It hurt. A lot. But yeah, I can't help it. I guess they'll regret what they said when we finally do get married and have kids, and they won't even be allowed to come near us then. As for my sister's fiancé, he finally showed up today to take back his things. This is the first time that I met him face to face after the whole fiasco, and he looked like he would have punched me if the law permitted it. He also looked worse for the wear, but I guess that's because he's been staying at a friend's place where all he does is drink and play video games after work, from what my sister's friends told her. Good for him. I guess he's finally found his calling in life, which just so happens to be nothing at all. He packed some of his clothes in a box since he'd taken most of his stuff with him already, and while packing, I kept an eye on him so that he wouldn't try to speak to my sister or say anything hurtful to her. Thankfully, he didn't try anything funny, and within half an hour, he was done. My sister had been sitting in her bedroom too emotional and afraid to come out and say goodbye for one last time, but her fiancé refused to leave without seeing her, so I had no option but to bring her out so that they could say goodbye to each other one final time. They did so, and I was surprised to find actual tears in his eyes as well, but I guess on some level he loved her too. It's just a pity that he couldn't put aside his toxic masculinity for once and ended up losing such a wonderful girl. They hugged and said goodbye. I felt really sad watching them, since not only had I been through this pain myself, now I also had to watch my sister go through the same thing. It was hard, and I almost cried myself. After he left, my sister ended up sobbing for a good hour or so, and it was really difficult consoling her this time, since I myself felt emotional and fragile as well. But then I had to be there for her. She cried herself to sleep eventually, and while I do feel terrible, I know it's for the best. Her fiancé promised her before he left that he tried to be good enough for her one day and asked her to wait. So I'm going to hold out hope, and hope that he lives up to that promise so that my sister can be happy. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.